We need to stop Governor Hochul's tax hike. Governor Hochul is trying to raise billions in additional revenue by increasing the payroll tax on small businesses in the MTA region, including right here in Hawthorne and the Hudson Valley. Some of the people behind me run small businesses that would suffer severely if Governor Hochul's payroll tax hike goes through. Not to mention some of the larger companies that will continue to flee our area if this goes into effect. As I've been saying for a very long time, folks are leaving New York State in record numbers, and it has nothing to do with the weather. Heck, it's 46 degrees out today. But they're leaving because of the crushing tax burden, and they're being regulated to death. And now Governor Hochul is proposing increasing another tax onto New Yorkers. And it is a surefire way to lose more residents and more businesses. And number two, we're here to say that Governor Hochul is not going to be able to eliminate local control of zoning. Governor Hochul's radical housing plan will decimate the character of neighborhoods across the Hudson Valley by forcing communities to develop rapidly, often against their wishes and their capabilities. If you look in Rockland County, Westchester County, Putnam County, Dutchess counties, many of the challenges with housing and development are around infrastructure, sewer, water, roads, schools, has to do with public safety. And Governor Hochul is demanding a 3% increase in housing throughout the entire MTA region, which will have a devastating impact on these communities. In Westchester, for example, Governor Hochul is mandating that the village of Ossining build 300 new housing units in what is already a very densely packed village. In Somers, 270 housing units. In Yorktown, 410. Over on my side of the river, Clarkstown is expected to create 919 new units, and Orangetown will be forced to add 570. That is roughly 3% of their current housing stock. Across the entire 17th Congressional District, we're looking at forcing municipalities to create over 10,000 new housing units or face the potential loss of local control of zoning permanently. Now, it's not that we're against housing. We all recognize the need for it. But we respect the rule of law. We respect the fact that local control of zoning is a bedrock principle in the state of New York. It is a constitutional right. And the governor is proposing to eliminate it. It's simply unacceptable. As all of this new mandate comes with a pittance of $250 million set aside for improving and repairing infrastructure. Anybody in Rockland and Westchester knows you can go through $250 million in infrastructure upgrades pretty quick. That's for the whole state. If Governor Hochul thinks that's enough money to help provide adequate funding for necessary improvements to infrastructure of municipalities across the entirety of New York State, then I have a bridge across the Hudson to rename her. Not to mention helping our schools deal with the inevitable influx of students. We're providing funding and support for law enforcement and first responders who will have to deal with more emergency calls and traffic than ever before. And that's why we're all standing here together, to call on Governor Hochul to put a stop to these two ridiculous plans, protect local control of zoning, stop overtaxing our small businesses and residents, and work with, not against, municipalities in Rockland, Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess counties. Now, I met with Governor Hochul the other day in Washington. She came down for a visit, and to her credit, she listened to us. She engaged in a thoughtful conversation. I raised these very issues with her directly. I raised the issue of her housing plan and the lack of investment in infrastructure. I raised with her my concerns about increasing the payroll tax. I also raised with her my objections to congestion pricing, which is nothing more than a money grab, taking away hard-earned tax dollars from suburban commuters. It would cost the average commuter about $5,000 a year in additional fees to commute into New York City. The cop, the firefighter, the nurse that have to get into Midtown Manhattan to work. $5,000 a year in extra fees. It is totally unacceptable. And all of this is to help the MTA. The worst run authority in America. And it's not even close. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The MTA needs an enemy. And every single person that is part of the MTA leadership should resign. It is a horribly run authority that has severely underserved the suburbs for years. They view us as an ATM. In Rockland County, we are the only county in the MTA region with a value gap. We pay $40 million more in taxes every year to the MTA than services we receive. And they have no plan to improve service. And yet we're expected to not only pay congestion pricing taxes, but to pay a payroll tax. And we're expected to build more housing around the MTA stations to increase ridership, just so they can fund their broken system. That's what this is about. So, again, I'm calling on Governor Hochul. I understand the concerns of New York City. I understand the concerns of the MTA. But I'm calling on Governor Hochul to do the right thing by people in the Hudson Valley and stop nickel and diming us to death. People are leaving this state in droves because they can't afford to live here anymore, and it's got to stop. We are not the ATM for the MTA. So with that, I will introduce my colleague, a former Yorktown supervisor and current state assemblyman, Matt Slater.
It's great to be here with everybody. I appreciate Congressman Lawler's strong advocacy on behalf of the Hudson Valley. When the budget came out and we heard the governor's remarks, my jaw hit the ground. We are facing an affordability crisis in this state. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We have one of the worst business climates in the nation. We are last when it comes to post-pandemic job recovery. And what's the governor's great economic development plan? More taxes, more spending, the largest proposed budget in state history. At some point, Albany needs to understand that a tax on jobs does not create jobs. But they can't figure it out. Instead, another 800 million is what they're trying to extract from Hudson Valley small businesses. It is completely unacceptable, completely reckless, and it cannot pass. On the housing side, I don't even know where to start there. I'm joined by a whole host of local officials here from the town of Yorktown, from Mount Pleasant, Somers, North Castle. We want local control, not Hochul control. It's absurd that we are going to actually lose control of our own decision-making process. And the numbers that the congressman talked about, where are you going to put those housing complexes? In the town of Yorktown, we've been forward-thinking. We recognize we need to have a diverse housing stock. And we've been very, very aggressive in updating our zoning. But we did it at our pace, at our way, and we did it with a full review of the potential impacts. If you read the governor's proposal, SECR comes off the table. There's no review or consideration of potential impacts. How does that make any sense for a local community? It doesn't. Lastly, one other piece that really needs to be brought to the forefront. In the governor's budget, she's proposing a shift of $1 billion from Medicaid to the counties. You know what that means? According to the New York State County Association, property taxes go up 5 to 10%. I can't afford that. Residents all over the Hudson Valley can't afford that. But again, it goes onto the backs of local taxpayers. Albany, we've had enough. Governor Hochul, no more. We are launching today a petition, and I encourage everybody who's so sick of the tax and spend madness of Albany, please visit www.stophochultaxhike.com. We can fight this. We can stop this. We can restore common sense to Albany, but it's going to take all of us together. So please sign the petition, and we can send a strong message that Governor Hochul is completely wrong when it comes to the future of the Hudson Valley. I really want to thank all the elected officials and business owners for being here. I want to thank Congressman Lawler for his great advocacy, and I'm going to turn it back over to him to introduce the rest of the speakers today.
Thank you. Just to comment on something Matt said, I mean, the governor has introduced a budget that increases spending by billions more than the enacted budget from last year. Over the last 2+ years, the Democrats in Albany have increased spending by over $40 billion. This is unsustainable. Completely unsustainable. And instead of figuring out a way to right-size our budget, to put us on the path to fiscal solvency, they are looking to increase taxes on hardworking middle-class families. That's what this is. And they're going to do it every which way they can. To move Medicaid funding from the counties to the state to backfill the state budget, as Matt said, means that the counties are going to have to increase taxes. Why? Because New York State is the only state left in the country that requires the counties to pay a quarter of the cost of the Medicaid program. And we have the most expansive Medicaid program in the entire nation. We pay 50% more for Medicaid than the average of the other 49 states. Totally unsustainable. With that, I want to introduce my good friend and colleague, Assemblyman from Rockland County, John McGowan.
Well, good morning, everyone. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to thank Congressman Lawler for this opportunity, putting this together, and inviting all of our colleagues here in government and our small business owners here today for this very important discussion. You know, as a new member of the State Assembly, I can't tell you how many days I walk away and I scratch my head and I say, what are we doing? What are we doing, and how are we making New York better? How are we making New York better for our residents, for our businesses, both now and moving forward in the future? And honestly, I can't tell you that we're doing that. And when Governor Hochul's executive budget came out, once again I said, what are we doing? To see a payroll tax for the MTA, to see all of these measures in place, this constant spending, yet again a budget that's the biggest one we've ever had in New York State. What message are we sending to our small business owners, to our families, about the future of New York State? We lead the nation in out-migration. Businesses are suffering, have continued to suffer during the pandemic. Finally, in 2023, we're hoping the pandemic is in our rear view and we can move forward in a positive direction. Yet once again, we have overreach by our state government. We have a money grab to support the MTA, and it's simply not right and it's not fair, and we're not going to stand for it. As a resident of Rockland County, as a former commuter into Manhattan, going to law school, and then commuting for work, I can tell you the services provided by the MTA are simply inadequate. In Rockland County, we do not have a one-seat ride into Manhattan. Yet, with congestion pricing, we're going to have to pay more. What we get for our services, as a congressman pointed out, falls far short of what we pay. It is unbelievable what we're doing here in New York State. and we continue to push businesses away, to not support them, and the future of our state, unfortunately, doesn't look very good when you consider what's being done. When it comes to housing, again, classic overreach by our governor, overreach by the state to usurp the power and the authority, the constitutionally protected power and authority of our local government, who is in the best position, primed to make those decisions, to find housing solutions that make sense. Each area is different, but we're united in that the local areas should be the ones who are in control of making those decisions, certainly not our state. So I thank everyone here today, my fellow colleagues in government, to stand together. Whether you're in Rockland, Westchester, or anywhere else in the state, we need to be unified in our message, in our opposition to the governor's proposals in this budget. We're going to fight, we're going to do what we have to do and make our voices heard, that we will not stand for it because we want a better future here in New York State. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. At this time, I'll ask our host supervisor, Carl Fugenzi, to step forward and say a few words.
Thank you, Congressman Lawler, for something that's led to bring this information to the attention of our governor. You may or may not understand the past 4 years, the town of Mount Pleasant has worked on a master plan. The master plan was not something created by the town board, it was created by the people in the town of Mount Pleasant, the residents and the businesses. I still believe that government is by the people, for the people, not government mandated issues. So my town board is very upset about this because we all worked very hard to get to this point and deliver something that the residents want, not what the town board wants, not what government wants, what the residents want. So I applaud you all for working on this and moving it forward, and we will make sure the governor hears. Thank you.
I'll ask Supervisor of the Town of North Castle, Mike Chirillo, to come up and say a few words.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Let me start by saying in North Castle, we have a lot of shared goals that the governor is trying to achieve in ADUs, in affordable housing. However, and we have a great history in our town of already doing this. We've been doing ADUs, accessory dwelling units, since the 80s. We've had middle-income housing, same thing as affordable housing, since the 90s. We were doing this before anybody told us we had to. But we did it with the input of the residents in our town. I was talking to the congressman earlier that this legislation that the governor is trying to put through is a one-size-fits-all, and it can't do it that way. It's impossible to do it that way. I said this last year, and I'm going to say it again. I've been serving 16 years. And I've seen a lot of things come through before our town and through government. This is the most aggressive form of government overreach for local government that I've seen in my time. I heard a quote, I watched the governor, and I have a lot of respect for the governor, I have respect for anybody who runs for office and puts themselves on the line and their family on the line. But you can still respectfully disagree. This is a quote. It was a quote that she was on Channel 11, and I had to freeze it and write it down. She said, we're going to be changing the laws. We're going to be changing the laws in our suburban areas. But they're ours, not the governor's and not Albany's. So we, meaning Albany, the governor, can allow more housing to be built. So New York State is taking a standpoint of, we're going to control this. And in New York, as the congressman said, it's a constitutional right. You need public input. We have 12,000 residents in our town. We've had multiple projects that we filled up our schools and filled up our library. We approve a lot of projects in our town. As a side note, our biggest challenge is we approve projects and change zoning and the developers don't build. That's a different challenge that I know Matt has shared in Yorktown when he was supervisor. But it gets back to one size doesn't fit all. If we have a school filled with 500 people expressing their opinions on a particular development, the local boards need to hear that. That helps shape our decision on how to make this the best project it can be. When you rip that away, when you rip away the secret process, and there's plenty of problems with the secret process, but local boards need to have the ability to hear from the people, and then hold the people accountable, hold the comments accountable, and then get the best project they can through to the town. So when you go through all this legislation and you pull all of that out and strip it all away and say one size fits all, it just doesn't work. One example, our town has 3 distinct hamlets. Armont, which is the center, Banksville, which is more rural, and North White Plains, which is the southern part, which touches White Plains. There's a North White Plains train station, which actually isn't in our town. But when you draw a half-mile radius around North White Plains, which is already dense, we could add literally 6,000 units, which is already too dense. And here are people that have worked hard, some of the dual income earners, spent their life savings on their dream home, and then to have an acre next to their house built with 50 units. That's what the new legislation is. 50 units if you're within 30 miles of New York City is unconscionable. And for them not to have a say in what would be developed and that zoning to be approved, the only analogy I can think of with this legislation, which is just too aggressive, is it's like taking the fabric of all of our communities where we all live, and this is an exaggeration, and running it through a shredder. And what comes out is unrecognizable. In our town in North White Plains, if this goes through, the lower part of North White Plains will be unrecognizable to what it is today. So, Congressman, I thank you for the opportunity to provide some comments. We all need to work hard to try to achieve the same goals, but one size doesn't fit all, and the mechanism of how the governor is trying to do this is wrong. What she's trying to do and to try to achieve some of these goals, we've all been doing already, but the how and stripping the ability for local governments to have a say, and the residents, more importantly, is just wrong. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And I think that's an important point to reiterate. In my town, the town of Orangetown, we've had an ADU law on the books for years. But it was a law that was put in place with the input of the local community. And it is not a one-size-fits-all approach to how we do it. Many communities are already doing TODs. And I think the big thing is if the governor wants to increase the housing stock, work with the municipalities, incentivize the municipalities, put money towards infrastructure investment, put money towards law enforcement and first responders, put money towards sewers, put money towards broadband and cell service. That's where the governor should be focused to help make it palatable to increase housing. But to just mandate an arbitrary 3% increase in housing without any investment in infrastructure, any plan to improve the services, I think is short-sighted and will have a devastating impact on our communities. With that, I want to introduce Somers Town Supervisor Rob Scarano to say a few words.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for everybody for coming here. I know I've heard a lot of things, home rule, right? Home rule is super important. But one thing I like to stress to everybody here and for people who are out there watching, right? One size does not fit all, right? Last year when we were sitting here at this time, it was a huge bipartisan effort. Republicans and Democrats coming together opposing this type of legislation. And you see that again here today as well. Republicans and Democrats coming together to oppose this type of legislation, right? For part of us, for Somers, we have done our fair share when it comes to affordable housing, right? But to strip that away from us and to strip the ability to be able to know what's in the best interest for your town is incomprehensible. Leaders lead at the highest levels, right? I urge the governor to listen to what is going on in the surrounding areas, in Putnam County and in Westchester County, Rockland County, right? Long Island. One size does not fit all, right? $250 million is not enough to be able for what she's proposing here, right? So Governor, I ask you and I urge you, if you want to see what's going on in your local municipalities, to come down and take a visit, talk to the local officials, and understand what their needs are and what their wants, and then work a plan to help do that as well. Okay? Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. And I just want to recognize Sergio Esposito and Ed Lockman, council members in Yorktown, who are doing a great job there it up to any questions, and appreciate you all coming out today.
In terms of dollars and cents with respect to payroll tax, what kind of businesses?
Well, the governor's proposal is seeking to raise over $1 billion in funds to help fund the MTA. And this has been my frustration. The federal government gives the MTA $2 billion a year towards capital improvements, construction, and the governor is now proposing with both the MTA payroll tax increase as well as congestion pricing to raise over $2 billion more in funding to the MTA. And that's why one of the bills that I first introduced was the Anti-Congestion Pricing Tax Act, which would basically strip New York of the $2 billion in federal funding and create a federal tax credit for those that are impacted by the congestion tax. The governor's plan is to just keep throwing more money at it, rather than actually fix the MTA. It is the worst run authority in the country. It needs to be completely overhauled. The amount of waste and abuse that goes on in that authority is unconscionable. And, you know, if the MTA is so concerned about funds, let's start with those who don't pay the fare, those who jump the turnstiles. The city council, moved, and the MTA has basically acquiesced not to prosecute these people. So, you want to start getting funds into the MTA, let's start there. That's projected to be about $500 million a year. It's shameful. So it's okay to not pay the fare to use the MTA, but all of us in the suburbs have to pay a payroll tax hike and have to pay congestion pricing. It's a joke. It's a joke.
You mentioned incentives as a possible for the housing, as a possible solution or at least a strategy. There are many housing advocates who say that the lack of housing that's affordable is one of the reasons that's driving people away from New York. Is there any, what are some strategies that might be suggested by anyone here about how to increase the housing stock? Because most towns have either ADU and or affordable housing legislation, and it's the number of units are deficient as far as having enough housing. What are the suggestions to come up with a different strategy?
So obviously the biggest factor here is just the cost of living, right? It is expensive to live in the Hudson Valley. Rockland and Westchester counties pay the highest property taxes in America. And so the first bill that I introduced in Congress this year was to lift the cap on solar. So number one, to make it more affordable for our residents, they need to be able to fully deduct their state and local taxes on their federal income tax. That's number one. Number two, you have to look at the cost of government. The state continues to increase spending. Well, you have to pay for it somewhere, and it's paid for through tax hikes, which is exactly what the governor is proposing in her budget. She's proposing to increase the payroll tax on small businesses. She's proposing a billionaire's tax, and you can't keep increasing taxes and expecting that people are going to stay here. The problem I have with the billionaire's tax, for instance, is guess what? The billionaires are moving. They're leaving. So you increase spending, you're projecting you're going to get all this revenue from the billionaires, and guess what? They're leaving the state. So who's going to pick up the tab? The middle class. And this is the problem. It is so short-sighted in how New York State operates. And so from a housing perspective, look, the state of New York has received billions of dollars in federal aid. And the bipartisan infrastructure bill, 10% of that is coming back to New York. So if you want to incentivize housing, then you need to have dedicated funds to support that increase in housing. So take that money that you got from the federal government and incentivize these municipalities to invest, incentivize these municipalities to build TODs or to build ADUs, and to build affordable housing. But the reality is that with the cost of living being what it is, it's not affordable. And that is directly tied to the continued increase in government spending. It's unsustainable. You can't increase government spending by almost $50 billion in 3 years and expect that people can afford to live here. Florida has far surpassed us in population. They have half the budget. So,
and Martin, just to go off on that a little bit more, Mike's 100% right. I think it absolutely comes down to affordability. Like we said, we're dealing with an affordability crisis. I think that we need a state spending cap, something that I've been talking about for over a year now. Because you can't continue, as Mike said, to tax and spend our way out of every problem that we face. Secondly, when it comes to housing, we need partners. We need partners in state government and federal government to help fund some of the issues that municipalities are facing. I'll give you a great example. We have a housing project that borders 118, a state road. But we need some improvements to the state road in the town of Yorktown. And when you go talk to the state, they tell you we're broke, we can't help you. Well, why am I going to put the housing there? It doesn't make any sense. And I think it's also important for people to understand what's the real issue here. The real issue is if a municipality rejects a housing proposal because of a lack of infrastructure, because of the impact that it's going to have on our schools, or police and fire, etc., there's an appeal process. And so they can go to an appeal process, and guess what? They can just say the town's wrong without understanding any of the impacts. And on the TOD side, that appeal process goes right to the Attorney General. It's ridiculous. And so I think that's where you can really incentivize housing, is by actually being a true partner with local governments. And the state has failed in that area every step of the way. And I will also add, I sit on the Transportation Committee, and we had our joint budget hearing earlier this week, and I asked the Commissioner of DOT that exact question. What is your plan to help enhance the infrastructure around some of these TODs that are being proposed? There is no plan. There's no allotted money, there's no thought process as to the impact it's having. And if you drive through the 94th Assembly District, and Supervisor Scarano can speak to this directly, all of our main arteries that go to the Metro North train station are state roads. They're already insufficient. And now you're going to add more people, more housing, you're going to need to enhance those roads, but they don't even have the money as it is. So it's a major problem.
And just to that point, Martin, last year in the State Assembly, I pushed to get a study on Route 303 in Rockland County, and State DOT is like, oh no, we can't. We don't have the funds to do that. We don't have the ability to do that. State Route 303 is a disaster. The traffic is insane. It's a commercial corridor, although there are residential units on there, and including some affordable housing and senior housing. And in order to do this effectively, you need the state to partner with the local municipalities. As Matt rightly pointed out, a lot of these local municipalities have state routes that run right through them. And so the state's unwillingness to invest in critical infrastructure, the state's unwillingness to partner with municipalities, but they're going to mandate a blanket 3% increase in housing without any realization of the differences within municipalities. Some of our municipalities in northern Westchester or Putnam County don't have sewage, don't have water. They're relying on well water. They don't have a water system. They have wetlands. This is insane and just totally illogical. In Rockland County, a third of our land is dedicated parkland. There's almost no land left to develop. It was a rural community that over the last 60 years has become a very suburban community. There's almost nowhere left to develop. So what is it that she's proposing? She's proposing to take an acre and build 50 units on it. That is not what people in Rockland County want. And so it's just, it's laughable to come up with this arbitrary and capricious number without any plan to improve the infrastructure of the community. Questions? All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.